While I was on a walk after releasing a video about Solar Ash, something occurred to me. While the gameplay emphasizes the speed with which Rei is capable of moving her physical body, the narration highlights the complete opposite. How this, lost in space Void Runner, is incapable of moving forward. Her mind is going in circles. The first boss, Ouroboros, reflects that. This contradiction creates meaning. In Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, Kenji's footsteps are light and his movement smooth. Like a gentle breeze, he roams the levels with ease. Loose fabric of his clothes and voluminous hair follow him, creating an image so weightless, it feels as if he's about to fly into the air like a blown dandelion. However, his movement is also precise. Years of training can be seen in every step, in every jump, in every dash. But Kenji's mind, unlike his refined movement, is lacking. It lacks discipline. His teacher, Ryu Hayabusa, told him to find his inner peace, although that went through one ear and out the other because Kenji decided to instead do what his master is best known for. Later on, when he, together with Kumori, invades a hidden outpost, it's not the spider that suggests a bold frontal assault. He does. Blinded by rage and newfound power, he starts heading strong into the enemies without any care for tactics. His image becomes less of a ninja and more of a butcher, yet his movement remains precise. There's a contradiction, just like in Solar Ash. Head moves to one song while legs to another, but in Ragebound there's nothing deeper. People run away from their problems all the time. It's human. What is not is moving around with surgeon's precision with blood temperature that's close to that of the sun. This movement is too pure. Fortunately, it's Ninja Gaiden, so no one gives a fuck. Kenji's parkour adventures might not mean a lot, but if we compare the message behind movement with its mechanical depth, there's a small gap. This system is connected to every functionality in the game. It runs deep. Thus, in order to talk about it, it's best to start by exploring everything else. So let's start with the basics. Ragebound is a simple game. The controls, enemy variety, combat, it's all as straightforward as the path to the end of the level. Unlike a game like Deadlock with 26 buttons, Ninja Gaiden requires only 9 of them, with just 3 of them being attack related. Each of them corresponds to a different attack. There are no combos, no blocking, parrying or perfect dodging. Combat depth doesn't come from vast arsenal of combat options, nor from interplay of various systems. On its own, it's simple. Enemies die to a single attack. Smaller ones can be even killed with guillotine boost, which is primarily a movement mechanic. Bigger enemies can be vanquished with a single hypercharge attack, which is always conveniently provided to the player by a nearby cannon fodder. But the game requires the player to move around to those smaller fries. Players' focus is shifted. Instead of worrying about how to attack, they can focus purely on the movement, which enemies to target first and how to get to them. This shift is further supported by the leniency of combat mechanics. True range of the attack is slightly bigger than the visual, plus it remains in the air for a moment instead of disappearing instantly. The player can fumble their attack really hard, and they will not be punished. This brings back memories.
Spikes are just AI hallucination.
With combat itself this forgiving, developers can explore and zero in on movement-related challenges. Levels in Ragebound are more akin to obstacle courses, a Ninja Warrior but with Squid Game's traps. I have to say that those are very well designed maps. It's a game where on most levels the enemies just pour from every direction of the screen onto the stage. It might seem like there's not a lot of room for the creators to try out different layouts. However, Game's Kitchen cooked anyway. There are many cleverly positioned traps, routes and enemies. Additionally, the developers were not afraid to create places purely for fun. A staircase made out of enemies is surely not coherent, but it is fun. Look at this beautiful piece of level design. The level clearly guides the player forward, however a single enemy spawns holding the ledge, which means that Kenji can jump down, hinting that there might be something extra there. And indeed, there is a collectible skull. Clever design smoothly guides the player through the stage, clearly focusing on the movement. Enemy design supports that as well. There's no stun nor parry, so unique enemies do not require those. Instead, the player has to move around them in a specific manner. Blobs become invulnerable when Kenji is close, so the player has to navigate around sometimes a very narrow space to disable the enemy ability. Various enemies have different attack patterns. Each of those has to be dealt with by moving differently, because it's not possible to attack differently. Well, That's a lie. While there are no heavy attacks, nor it's possible to chain them, it is possible, however, to change their range and shape. Kenji will attack differently during a dash or a jump, so in order to become even deadlier, the player has to learn how to move properly. It feels like controlling Doomslayer, but without the need to constantly swap 20 weapons and manage 7 different grenades, flamethrower, chainsaw and a sword on top of all that inventory. Just move the ultimate ninja into the general vicinity of a demon and watch as he turns into minced meat. The game is an absolute power trip. Killing enemies is so simple yet so satisfying. Everything dies to a single hit, and if it doesn't, it does.
But it sounds repetitive.
It sure does sound like it should get boring really quickly. Since all you have to do is move around and press a single button, it doesn't strike as a varied title. But weirdly enough, it doesn't get repetitive. Each level is one of a kind, be it a unique layout, gimmick or just enemy positions and types. Each stage feels and plays differently. Even bosses, despite the fact that they do not introduce the completely new mechanics, they still take a lot of tries to beat. Each one of them has very unique attack patterns that require quite a lot of tries to get used to. It's also worth praising how cleverly unique mechanics of the bosses are taught to the player. Pig Demon charges at Kenji during a cutscene way before the final fight at the end of the level, and Kenji makes it obvious that the player is supposed to bounce off the beast's head. Similarly to this, the game shows the player how to dodge the attacks of the electric bitch before the confrontation. But in this case, it also becomes a part of the level, as the player has to constantly dodge her attacks while navigating around. I love the fact that it's a more organic way of teaching the player what to do. Plus, I love how this is intertwined with the levels, that it becomes a part of the stage. It feels fun to interact with the boss before reaching him, but even with those, let's say, tutorials, boss fights will still prove to be rather challenging. Players will most likely have to face them multiple times before obliterating them. The game itself might not be repetitive, but repetition is the name of the game. Ragebound is built to be repeated, not just the final stance against big bad demons, but also the entire levels, and as it will unravel after the first playthrough, the entire game as well. It thrives when the player plunges himself into the routine of endless repetition, and it all starts with a single. On the first try, the player will most likely not get an S. If he desires to hear that sweet, then he will have to replay the level, probably multiple times. Getting that sweet S is quite challenging. First of all, 3 main challenges must be completed, on top of stellar performance throughout the level, but the player also has to find all collectibles, so the game requires the player to almost 100% the stage. There is a very tiny bit of room for wiggle with the numbers of enemies killed. It's small, but it is there. Additionally, some of the challenges can be super nasty, like not getting hit by the boss. All bosses are at the end of the level, so you know. No pressure. But mastering those levels feels so satisfying when the meter finally hits that sweet S++. Well, on top of all the requirements that have to be cleared to get an S rank, it's also possible to further increase the difficulty by equipping talismans. Not only do they clog the spot for equipment that grants positive effects, but they also introduce some nasty debuffs. Triple the damage received, make it so that there's no healing on the level, or make it so that the checkpoints straight up don't work anymore. However, in return, they increase the final rank by 1, allowing the meter to go up and up to reach the magic S++. Rank, born out of pure skill and dedication. Medal for true madmen, those who do not fear to repeat the level one more time just to achieve that magic run and receive the honor of becoming the ultimate ninja. Suffice to say that this also strongly encourages speedrunning, and the developers were absolutely aware of that. In fact, they actively encouraged it. They held multiple challenges for the players. The game was always meant to be run.
But there are issues that make it annoying.
Yes, weirdly enough, developers were aware that they made a game which will be replayed a ton, but still let a couple of nasty issues through. Those bugs, while tragic when they happen, do not happen very often. Which, for people that will replay the game a lot to get the best run, is even more frustrating, because instead of occurring every time and straight up deter the player from usage of a specific mechanic, it waits in the shadows, making the player forget that it exists only to rear its ugly head when the player is most focused. But they are just not consistent enough to repel people like me. I genuinely enjoyed speedrunning the levels, even with occasional glitches completely destroying the runs. However, if you are not into speedrunning, you can still find more fun with the game by replaying it on the hard difficulty, because hard in Ragebound is one of the best difficulties ever made. When I think about higher difficulties in games, the very first thought I have is more numbers. But remember, one of the principles of the game is that everything dies to a single hit, spin or charge attack. So increasing health pool of enemies is not something that can be done. I mean, it can, but that would absolutely destroy the game. Developers had to come up with something different. This instance of Ninja Gaiden is an obstacle course. The difficulty comes from movement, not standing in front of the enemy and bashing his teeth in with an elaborate chain of attacks. So the developers zeroed in on that. The first major change to the levels on hard difficulty is that they are cluttered with hazards. Kenji is no longer taking a stroll through them. He really has to break sweat to get through even a simple corridor. The second difference between the difficulties are the new upgraded enemies. No difference in health and damage, instead they are changed in other ways. In ways that exaggerate who those enemies are. Skulls charge at the player from longer distances, demons run faster and Onis swing their mace like crazy, making it impossible to get close. Player has to change how he approaches those enemies when he fights them. The best change, however, in the entire game is this single hazard, because it completely changes the dynamics of the boss fight. Despite the fact that the boss himself is not touched at all, it feels like it's a completely different fight. A very carefully placed fire is enough to create a completely different experience. Devs achieved something amazing here, but the problem is that it's the only place they did it in. Okay, there's also this one, but out of 12 boss fights, only 2 of them are changed. It sucks, because in comparison to the first boss, not seeing any changes to the rest of them feels kind of cheap. Or maybe just experiencing something this good makes the rest a bit worse in comparison. Maybe. I would probably not even think about the bosses being the same if all of them were not changed. But because the first one blew me out of the water, it did set expectations for the rest of them. Overall, there's still a lot of love and care poured into the hard difficulty, so to all people that haven't finished it, go play it, do it, lock in. If you can't get through the final boss rush, use the accessibility settings, they are great. Seriously, there's no shame in experiencing the game with a little bit of help. And if you haven't played the game at all, it's available on GOG. Thanks for watching, good luck, and have fun.